Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. I have with me here Jacob Burgos, who scored an amazing 770 on the GMAT on his first try. I'm Marty Murray with Target Test Prep. I'm head of curriculum there, and we're going to find out, the goal here is to find out what happened that got Jacob to his 770 on the first try, because it's pretty cool. It's a high score we'd all like to achieve, and I think we can have a lot to learn from Jacob. So welcome, Jacob. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, Marty. I'm glad to be here.
Great. So let's get started. I'm wondering, can you tell us, just to set the scene here, what's your background? Like, what brought you to the GMAT, and what did you study before you took the test, and just your basic background?
So I think I always wanted to go and get my MBA ever since I was probably in high school. When I was in college, I went to UC Santa Barbara and studied physics. I got my bachelor's in science and physics.
Okay.
And throughout college and for the past few years out of college, I've worked in a series of family businesses that started when I was a freshman in college. And I've just done everything from like finance to operations. I just feel like now was a good time for me to start heading towards going to get my MBA, and then started studying for the GMAT.
Interesting. So you studied physics, you've been in the family business, ready for the GMAT. What did you do first? You took a practice test, jumped in answering a lot of questions. How did you start proceeding with this?
So before I even looked into courses, I took a practice test. One of the very first official practice tests, just to kind of gauge where I was at and what my strengths and weaknesses were. From there, I researched different courses online, really through Google, and I came across Target Test Prep. I kind of looked through the website. I looked through the different demos that were available, as well as just online reviews of the course, and it looked to me like it was very detailed and very easy to navigate. So it's I went with it, and I'm very glad I did.
Cool. I guess apparently. So now, did you take a practice test? You hadn't taken the GMAT before, right? Did you take any practice tests toward the beginning of your prep?
Yes. So I took a practice test before doing anything.
Really?
When I took the practice test, yeah.
And how'd you score on that?
I found that I scored a 720 on the first practice test.
Okay, whoa. So wait, you scored 720 on the first practice test. So, I mean, what do you remember your sub scores in that test? Were you better quant, verbal?
I was much better in quant than in verbal. I think I scored like a 49 in quant, and I don't 100% remember my verbal score, but I know it was significantly lower than the score I eventually got.
That totally makes sense. So now I think that as far as people watching go, they're saying, well, look, this guy's a genius. He scored 720 the first time around. But I mean, I'm looking at your background and what you said. You've been working in finance, right? You studied physics for 4 years of college. Is that correct? So, I mean,
I got my BS in physics.
Like, the first thing you got to remember that, like, the whole thing with the GMAT is effective preparation, right? No matter what your starting point, the whole thing to getting to your score goal is effective preparation. So sometimes people look at someone like Jacob and go, wait a minute, man, he scored 720 on the first test. I could never do that. He started from an easy point. But I think the thing to remember is that Jacob was preparing. You were preparing for GMAT Quant for 4 years before you saw the test, right? Would you say that's correct?
100%. Yeah. I mean, in the Quant, and Target Test Prep breaks this down very well into about 20 to 30 different sub chapters. And I would say of those sub chapters, the only ones that I felt I really needed to review was like the geometry and the sequences. But other than that, all the other chapters I already understood in depth from my bachelor's degree.
Yeah, so I think that's really key here. So preparation takes care of the GMAT. I mean, we're once again showing that, but clearly your score increased a lot. So you get to the TTP course. What did you find? I mean, where were your issues? What did you need to do?
So at the very beginning, when I approached the course, I approached it from a perspective of, okay, I'm going to go through every chapter and every practice test. And probably about 1 month into studying, I'm doing this while working full time, and I have a pretty busy work schedule. So I just realized that might not work for me. I think it could work for others, but for me, I just decided, all right, I'm going to focus on what I know I don't know. So I kind of, in looking at Quant, I said, okay, well, I'm going to skip most of the chapters that I feel I know from my background in physics. Things like algebra, word problems, and focus on the things that I know I don't know, like geometry and sequences. In the verbal sections, I had to study. I read every chapter and did every practice problem for the sentence correction, because I knew that I struggled with that. I mean, I don't think I wrote an essay since high school or did grammar since middle school. So I knew I didn't know anything there.
So what I'm kind of hearing is that your path to your score was through your weak areas. Would you say that's true?
100%. Yeah. It's way more, in my opinion, it's way more effective use of your time to study something that you don't know than to study something that you already understand from your background.
Yeah. So how did you feel about sentence correction in general? Like coming into this?
When I took the first practice test, I felt I was guessing on like every sentence correction problem.
Right.
And by the end, when I took the actual test and through really my only resource was the course. So through the course, I found that my approach was completely different. I was approaching it from the perspective of actually knowing what to look for and being able to select an answer that I knew was correct versus guessing. And it really did improve my sentence correction and my verbal score as well.
Right. So basically we're saying to get to where you needed to go, things had to click, right? You came into this, you know what you were doing, you see the material, you're guessing on every question, and things had to click for it to start to work for you. So how would you say, like, what parts of the course did help things click? Like, how did the course, can you go through some points of how it actually helped things click for you?
Yeah. So I think there was really two big things for me. And I'll focus on the sentence correction here, because that's what I studied the most in kind of my journey through this course. First of all, the chapters are really in depth, and they don't just tell you, they explain the concept rather than just telling you how to answer the problem correctly. And I think understanding the concept allows you to apply it to a range of problems rather than just being able to answer this one problem that you might be presented with.
Can I interrupt you right there?
Yes.
I think that's a huge takeaway. And this applies to Quant too, for everybody. That what you really want to do is really understand things from the ground up. And I think that one of maybe the most interesting thing you said, Jacob, is that it allows you to apply the concept in any context, right? And this applies to Quant too as well, folks. Like for myself as well, when I was studying for the GMAT, I found that the more deeply I understood the concept, the more I could apply it across a broad spectrum of questions, you know? And the other thing about deeply understanding things is it saves you from so-called careless errors. Because a lot of the time what you think is a careless error comes from not fully understanding what you're doing. You know, I made a careless error. I can't believe it. I made so many careless errors on this test. Well, really? You know what I mean? Like if you make a careless error in probability, you know that the probability should be, if you're really clear about how probability works, and you make a careless error where you're saying that the probability is greater than 1, well, you're never going to make that error if you really understand probability, right? Even if your calculation is wrong, you're going to say there's no way this is right. So that was, I think, more, maybe more than you even realized, Jacob, that was a key thing. So yeah, please continue on with the SC stuff.
Yeah, the second kind of factor of the course which really helped me was the when you miss a problem, the course tells you, kind of points you towards the chapter and actually the page in the chapter that covers the topic. And that really helped me, actually more so in Quant, because when I went through Quant, I was going through very quickly and maybe just taking one practice test in the sections that I felt strongly with here and there. And so if I missed a problem, I could see if it was a conceptual misunderstanding or if it was just a math error by quickly referencing the chapter. And that saved me a ton of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got a couple questions coming in. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, we'll get to your questions in a minute. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. And I mean, this applies for anybody. As you're preparing, right? I mean, whether you're using a TTP course or whatever resource you're using, you really want to have that ability to fill those knowledge gaps. You know what I mean? That's what you're going to get you to your high score. So here, like for instance, I'm always telling people, and if you're on GMAT Club or you interact with me at all, you're always hearing me saying, well, look, you have to achieve really high accuracy in your practice. And people say, well, how am I going to do that, right? Like, do I go slower? What do I do? Well, one thing is you definitely go slower. But the other thing you do is every time you miss a question, you do what Jacob said. You go back and fill the knowledge gap, whether using tags in the TTP course or whatever you have to do. Say, identify why you missed the question and go back and fill that knowledge gap. That way, when you see that kind of question the next time, you're going to get it right. And this applies to Quant, SC, critical reasoning, reading comp, whatever it is. Keep filling your knowledge gaps as you go. And like Jacob said, if you're using the Target Test Prep course, use those tags on the questions to go back to the right lesson, right? So, okay, so what's the next thing?
Those were the two big takeaways for me from the course.
Yeah.
Those are the two biggest things that pop out to me. If I could try to think of a third, but those were the two that came to me right away.
So the main things were thoroughness and that ability to go back and fill those knowledge gaps. I mean, that's a theme. Those are themes all the way through prep. You know, you got to be thorough. You have to understand things. You got to fill those knowledge gaps and skill gaps as you go, you know? Okay. So now you were doing this. How much were you preparing per week? Like how long did this all take?
It really depended on, I'd say it averaged anywhere from 5 to 10 hours a week for maybe a period of around 5 months.
Okay.
Yeah, and it really varied. Some weeks I didn't study at all. Some weeks I studied 10 hours. You know, I was, my work schedule would vary. So some weeks maybe I would only have to work 40 hours. And then some weeks I'd have like a crazy 70-hour work week. And I didn't have time to study. And it really varied depending on my availability.
So, okay, how did you stay motivated through all this? I mean, first of all, you had started at a pretty high score, but clearly you had a higher goal. What did you do? Did you do anything in particular to stay motivated? Like, you know, what kept you going?
So a big thing for me was just being really meticulous with setting a goal for studying and trying my best to reach that goal. So I had set a goal of 10 hours per week. Like I mentioned before, I didn't always hit that goal, but every time I had a spreadsheet, and every time I studied, I would write down what date I studied and how many hours I studied.
Right.
And then at the end of the week, I would look at it and say, you know, did I hit my goal? Did I not hit my goal? And I think that really helped me stay honest, because if I went a whole week without studying, then at the end of the week, I would look at my goal and say, hey, I didn't do anything this week. And it would kind of push me to next week to ensure that I hit my goal.
Right. Yeah. So that's interesting. Tracking is key. You know, what do they say? What's measured gets paid attention to. Tracking your prep is great. The TTP course has a calendar feature you can use to also track your prep, or you can use the mission feature and you can just see your percentages going up and keep track of that. But that's super interesting. So you're tracking it as you go along. Okay. Now, we didn't talk too much about the other parts of the verbal section of the test. And I'm pretty interested because you focus on sentence correction. How did you feel about, for instance, reading comp?
I actually felt that I understood it from my physics background, so I didn't spend much
Okay.
time studying it.
Really? How is that possible? How would your physics background prepare you for reading comprehension?
Well, the reading comprehension section in my mind was really kind of like a word problem.
No kidding.
And that's all physics was word problems. So it related in the sense of like using logic to determine, what information you were given, determine what information you weren't given to complete a thought. All of those, I felt that I had a very good background in that. And, my practice test scores reflected that just from my history, what I studied in college.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I think a lot of people here, we get so many people to say, look, I'm strong in quant. I'm having so much trouble in verbal. But you're coming into this saying that the verbal side is actually a lot like basically what you were studying was more mathematical, right? Am I wrong?
No, that's correct. 100%.
That's pretty interesting. That's super interesting. So what about critical reasoning? Because critical reasoning gives a lot of people a lot of trouble. And once again, they come into it saying, look, I'm good at quant. I'm good at DS. I can kill these, I can score 50 on quant. And verbal, I'm scoring in the 20s. What do I do? So what about critical reasoning? I mean, was physics applicable to that as well?
I really felt it was. I just think the process of being presented with a set of information and determining either what conclusions can be made with that information or the strengths or weaknesses of that information is more similar to math than you might originally think, because there's no math included in the problem, but it's still similar to like a math or a logic problem.
That's so interesting. And it's funny. I've actually done this because I studied economics in college, which is not physics, but it was also very much based on what's logical. We were, you're constantly figuring out, okay, what happens if we change this factor? Demand goes up. What happens if we change that factor? Demand goes down. I mean, so I think this is kind of similar to what you're saying, right?
Yes.
Pretty interesting. I've also, a lot of time, folks, if you watch any of my critical reasoning videos, you'll see that I use arrows for the answer choices. This choice is going up, this choice is going down, and I bet, Jacob, that reminds you of physics, right? You guys use arrows in physics a lot.
Yes, yeah, like vectors.
That's pretty interesting. So look, okay, the next takeaway here is that you were able to take what your basically your quant strengths and parlay them into verbal strengths. And people, I totally recommend this. The more you see GMAT verbal as very logical and tight, even sentence correction. And what we're doing a lot of the time is we're taking a modifier. What happens if we move the modifier here? What effect does that have? Let's try moving the modifier in another place. What effect does that have? And we're basically changing the effects. You could almost say this sentence correction is even somehow parallel to physics. I mean, what did you end up getting in verbal, Jacob?
44.
Yeah, okay. So clearly your verbal score went up a lot because you're not anywhere close to 44 if you're 49 in quant and you're scoring a 42 on the test. You were somewhere in the 30s. So you drove this score up, and basically by mastering sentence correction and at the same time taking those skills that you already had, those quant skills, and making verbal happen. Okay, so now, so you did this, you got the course, you started. Did you take any practice tests during the course? How did your process go? How did your development go?
So I bought the course in around early January of this year, and I didn't take another practice test until mid-April. Okay. I think everyone's different, and not everyone has to wait that long to take another one. But that is, I mainly took that second test as a benchmark to see, well, how close am I? I wanted to score at least a 750 on the actual exam. So when I took that second practice test, I think I scored like a 760 on it. And what that signaled to me is okay, I think I'm ready. And so at that point, I booked my actual exam about a month out and spent that last month just doing some final review.
That's interesting. Okay, cool. And I think one takeaway here is, yeah, folks, do what he did. Two things there. One is don't take, I mean, maybe for some people it helps to take a practice test once in a while as you're prepping, especially if it's taking you a long time to get through the material because you're fairly new at it or something. But basically, you don't need to take many, many practice tests while you're preparing because for instance, like Jacob, you weren't that good at sentence correction. So taking another practice test a couple of weeks in was just going to show you the same thing, that you had just started preparing for sentence correction. So really, for a lot of people, I think it does make sense to wait and take that second or third, the following practice test after the first one later in your prep. Another thing I totally recommend is doing what you did. You didn't schedule a GMAT until you had some visibility regarding when you would be ready, right? I mean, I've seen so many people taking the test, they sign up, they schedule a test for a month from when they start preparing, then they prepare for a month or a month and a half, they realize they're not ready, they push it back another month, or they take it, they use up their lifetime attempts taking the test. I mean, if you're scoring 720 on practice tests and your score goal is 750, it doesn't really make sense to take the real GMAT at that point. If you're scoring 680 and your score goal is 710, not too many people have a lucky day on the GMAT. So it really works well to do just what Jacob did and wait to schedule your GMAT until you have that visibility. Now, you said you scheduled it for a month out. That makes a lot of sense to me. You had that first practice test. You got the sense that you were close, and then you gave yourself a month to lock it in, right? So what did you do during that last month?
Yes. And so I kind of broke it up into two parts. For part of that month, I had not touched the integrated reasoning or writing part of the course. So
yeah,
I spent about a week reviewing integrated reasoning, reviewing the writing sections, really following for the writing sections, the recommendations on the course to go through that list of essays provided by the GMAT, and kind of take bullet points on your main points on what your three arguments would be. I hadn't written a 5-paragraph essay since high school, so that really helped me for the writing.
And how did you end up doing on the writing on the AWA?
I got a 6.
Yeah. So look, I mean, that's key, folks. If you to get to that 6 in the AWA, it helps so much. You can go through, the topics are all listed. GMAT lists all the topics, barring maybe a few, they say, or something. On the website, you can go through and do just what Jacob did. For your essays, you don't have to write 20 essays. Maybe you write 1 or 2 practice essays, but you can go through topic after topic and come up with your 3 points for each topic, and just get used to saying, okay, what are 3 points I could use to support this argument, and then go to the next one. What are 3 points I could use to show how this argument doesn't work? What can I do to come up with 3 points for this argument? And after a while, you're just going to be able to come up with your 3 points, which is probably the hardest part of writing one of those essays, and get yourself to that high essay score. Okay, and then you were mentioning the integrated reasoning section.
Yes, and so I just went through everything that the course provided on integrated reasoning and studied all of those, the chapter, as well as all the practice problems within the chapter. And that by the time I got through the end of it, I felt pretty ready for integrated reasoning.
Would you say your quant and verbal prep sort of prepped you for that as well, or did it, how do you feel about that?
Yes, I think it did. And also my background really lent to integrated reasoning. It also kind of had some overlap with physics on the quant, but the topics in the course, I found myself using them often when I was doing the integrated reasoning problems and prep.
Interesting. Okay, cool. So now test day is coming up. Did you do anything in particular the week before your test? Like, what were some best practices you found that really helped you? Because look, you really nailed it. You really knocked the ball out of the park here. So anything we could learn from you about like how to set up for that practice test? I mean, how to set up for the GMAT in the weeks going into it, like to really be ready, or the day before, or the morning before? What did you do? What made you so successful?
So one thing that I think really helped me is I took 3 practice tests within maybe the last 2 weeks before the actual exam. My exam was at 8 a.m. and I took all 3 practice exams at 8 a.m. I took them as if it was an actual test. The the apartment building that I live in has these office buildings that we can kind of schedule time in. Like these little offices that we can schedule time in. So I scheduled time in the office. I brought my computer down there. I left my phone in another room. I timed myself as if it was an actual exam. And I took it I made the practice test as close as possible as I could to what the actual test would be like. The benefit of this is when I actually took the exam, I knew what I was going to expect. I felt more comfortable. And, of course I was a little nervous, but I felt much less nervous because I was able to tell myself, hey, you've done this 3 times in the last 2 weeks. This is
right.
What's going to happen.
That's so key. Yeah. And notice, folks, what he did, as far as you said, you took your practice test at the same time as you took your real test. Did you also, you booked it at 8 a.m. Was there any particular reason for that?
It was the only time available. So I had this prep idea where I would get up at like 5:30 and work out and have coffee. And so all 3 days, I even did that where I woke up. I tried to keep my morning almost exactly the same way it would be on the actual exam day.
Absolutely. That's the way to do it. So now we have a question from Lauren who's asking, how do you know when you might be ready for the actual exam? How did you know?
Really, when I took the second practice exam as a benchmark, funny enough, I didn't feel ready before I took that second practice exam. But once I took it and I saw my score, I said, okay, I think I'm ready now. And to kind of to Marty's point, by the time I took that practice exam, I had already gone through every chapter and every practice problem in the sentence correction where I felt weakest. So I had prepared. I had prepared a good amount before I took it. I didn't just take it a month after I started studying.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. What about the subsequent practice exams? Did they go as well, better, worse? How did you feel during them?
I think I scored a 760 on every single practice exam I took, numbers 2 through 5. So it was
really?
very consistent in my score.
So
yeah.
That's another sign too. It's another sign that you've really, and I think that speaks to what you said about covering everything in depth. So you were consistent because you had that depth. And I see it a lot, someone will score 760 on one or 720 on one and then 660 on the next. What's going on? It's because if you're doing that, you don't have that depth. You don't have the depth of skill, the depth of knowledge. So when you're on. When the questions match your skill set, you're on. But if it's not what you've seen before or something, you don't know what to do. So yeah, you can see the results of Jacob's fully understanding the topics and doing that comprehensive work. Is it no matter what the test is throwing at you, you were getting the questions right. Someone's saying how to find my knowledge gaps. Like, how do you find those knowledge gaps? One thing you can do is look, you said you used the lessons, but did you use any other technique to find knowledge gaps?
The first practice exam kind of pointed a few things out to me where, I think when I was taking the practice exam, I got a geometry problem and I had no idea how to answer it. And I was like, okay, I need to study geometry. Obviously there's a large range of questions. So one thing I think you could also do is if you're maybe just looking at quant specifically, either take one of the practice quizzes or look at what like the summary of what's being taught in the chapter and see if it's something that you know and understand. If the topics on algebra and all the headings are topics of algebra which you feel really comfortable with, then you might not need to invest the hour or 2 hours into reading through the chapter. But if you feel that if you are, I guess just be honest with yourself, right? When you're looking through the course titles and doing the problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing, what worked for me is the practice questions themselves would also tell me what I was missing. You do it like, for instance, sentence correction practice question or a critical reasoning practice question. You get one right and another one wrong. Well, what is the difference between the two questions? What did this question have that the other question didn't have? And there's one of three things really is going to be going on. You either have a knowledge gap, a skill gap, or just some execution issue. You just blew something you knew you should have done. But a lot of times just look at the patterns to what you're missing. If you really can't tell what your knowledge gap is, look at the patterns to what you're missing, add them up and say, like, if you're keeping an error log, which the course helps you do, look at the patterns to your errors and say, like, what am I having trouble with? What's killing me here? And if there's no pattern to them, then maybe you have an execution issue. And if there is a pattern to them, then you probably have a knowledge gap that you can find by looking at those particular questions. I think we covered what you covered in Quant pretty much, but maybe you could repeat because somebody's asking about that.
Which topics did I study in Quant?
Yeah. What did you, just quickly, what topics did you need to study in Quant?
For me, the big ones were geometry and the geometry section, the probability section, and any section covering like permutations or combinations.
Anything you probably wouldn't use in physics too much.
Yeah, and that required us
to use overlapping Venn diagrams in physics.
We'd not really, no.
Yeah, I guess that was probably another one too.
Yes.
Someone else is asking. So you mentioned coffee, I think. Did you use caffeine to your advantage? Someone's asking.
I mean, I drink coffee, so I did I drank coffee before I took the exam, but it wasn't. I drink coffee every morning, so
yeah,
I would have been a zombie if I didn't.
Right. I mean, and I think the thing people have to realize that about too. I hear too many people saying, "Yeah, I wanted to be on for the test, so I took coffee or maybe some kind of pill or whatever it is." It's like, man, if you don't do this every day, don't do it on test day. I mean, you saw what the success formula for Jacob was, basically doing the same thing on test day that he does every other day, including taking a practice test, including getting up at a certain time, including taking the test. So, yeah, don't say, Luke, I'm going to be pumped today. I'm having 3 cups of coffee. I mean, it really differs for everybody. I think some people do a lot better without the caffeine and some people do better with it. And you just have to really gauge what works for you. And, don't go too crazy with caffeine thinking this is really going to help you rock things. I mean, a lot of doing well in the GMAT is being like sort of zen. So loading up like really heavy on caffeine is, it's almost in a lot of cases going to take you in the wrong direction. It's one thing to have that cup of coffee in the morning. It's another thing to say, okay, I'm doing my GMAT prep and I'm having 2 cups of coffee. Let's go. You got to be zen. So you don't want to be too wired. So now someone's asking, did you finish the target test prep? So you would say in a way you finished it, right? Before you took the second test?
Yes. I mean, if you were to look at like my percentage bar at the top, I didn't finish it, but for me myself, I felt that I finished it because I had studied everything in the course that I felt I needed to study to be ready.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's the key thing to do. And once again, I think it's so interesting for people to see. Look, it was so easy for you to do the quant, and so many people shy away from sentence correction or verbal. You got to dive into your weak areas. Once again, that is the path to your high score. You can see how it worked for him. He's like, look, I'm not good at sentence correction. That's what I'm going to spend my time on. It's so easy to spend your time on that. Oh, I'm looking great. I'm getting 90% of this kind of questions correct. I'm looking good. You love it. You feel so good in the quant. You're enjoying permutations and combinations or roots and exponents. You're feeling so good. And then you look over at your verbal side. You barely touch it. Dive into your weaknesses and make it happen. So someone's asking, what would be an ideal strategy for CR? What do you think, Jacob?
I didn't have I didn't follow any one strategy. So I think that's a hard question for me to answer. The way I approached critical reasoning was I approached every problem as a logic problem, and I guess I use kind of a technique because I use process of elimination to eliminate answers which had some sort of flaw in the reasoning, but that was really the only strategy I used. I mean, I wouldn't
back down from that because it worked.
Yes.
And I think that is the crux of critical reasoning is, number one, realizing it is logic. Like it's so easy to go through a course or hear people's comments and start thinking that critical reasoning, I need to know techniques. I need to know these gimmicky approaches. I'm going to pre-think my answer choice. I'm going to eliminate all the extreme choices or something like that. But if you just see someone saying, look, I've learned to be logical in physics. I can tell what's logical. I can tell what the effect of this is. And that person scores high on this. Well, what does that tell us? You know what I mean? It tells us that we don't need like gimmicky GMAT strategies for critical reasoning. What it really comes down to in the end is understanding, as you said, the effect of every choice and how logical it is and how it lines up and what it does to the conclusion or what it does to the argument. What is the effect here? And I think that's a huge theme in the GMAT as well. I think the biggest, coolest thing maybe from this whole discussion is that physics is all about effects of things, right? To a large degree. Mm-hmm. How do things relate? How do they affect each other? And you come into the GMAT, you're already scoring 720. You're not even having trouble with critical reasoning. Why? Because you get effects, right? Mm-hmm. That's where this is coming from. And then you just put the icing on top by jumping into your weak areas, learning some techniques and some concepts really super well. So now you're using that same thinking and sentence correction, right? What is the effect here? What is the effect of moving this word, right? And now, so you didn't have the conceptual framework of that, but you probably already had the logical framework. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Then boom, you're at 770. Why? Because you're being logical. And what is the test? The GMAT is a test of reasoning. And that, I would say, is the story with this high score here. You know, would you agree?
Yeah, I agree 100%. And to kind of riff off what you were saying a little bit, the purpose of the critical reasoning is not to test how many gimmicks or tricks you've learned. It's to test your ability to reason critically. I mean, so if you approach it from the standpoint of what's logical, I think it makes it a lot easier. That's really what they're trying to gauge here, not how many different tricks you found online for critical reasoning problems.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, when I first started preparing myself, someone said I was, learning from some people around me, and someone said, look, the GMAT is not a test. Like they know you're busy. It's not a test of just learning a million things, So much of it is, can you take this information and apply it? And yeah, if you don't have the information for sentence correction or quantum, whatever it is, you're going to have to learn some things. Mm-hmm. But eventually what it's really going to come down to is how do I apply this information and make it work logically. So now someone's asking how much time to spend on SC questions on the test. The difference for everybody. For me, I spent close to 2 minutes on the SC questions. People say, how could you spend close to 2 minutes on the SC questions? But I really wanted to get them right. I dug in real deep on those. And like sometimes I would spend 3-4 minutes on an SC question. And the CR I actually found, like you said, or sort of imply it can be easy if you're being super logical. How much time would you say you spent on an average SC question?
I'd say equal to, if not longer than the other verbal question types.
That's so interesting. Yeah, if you're being super logical, the other ones can be easy. And then the sentence correction, you're like, whoa, what do I need to see here? I mean, that's the thing with all this verbal stuff is what do I need to see? And it definitely applies in sentence correction a lot. It's like, and you got to see like the meaning, the issues and everything else. The other ones, you can just read it and see the logic of what's going on. So they can actually be faster, right? Absolutely. Especially if you've been preparing for it that way all along. Okay, so now we come to test day. How did that go?
Well, it was an early test. So I got to the exam center maybe like 15 minutes early. Had to put all my stuff in a locker. And when I actually took the exam, I felt really nervous. I started with Quant, and I felt really nervous during the Quant section for maybe the first half of the Quant section. And then I kind of started to ease into the exam, and it got a lot easier. I started moving a lot quicker and feeling more confident with my answers. But for I'd say the first 30, 40 minutes, maybe 30 minutes of that exam, I was feeling really nervous. Mainly because I didn't want to have to take the test again. And once I think because I prepared as much as I did, and because I took practice tests the same way I was going to take the actual test, as I started getting a good ways into the exam, I felt more comfortable. I felt more confident, and I felt that I was moving through the test a lot easier and quicker, just by kind of relying on my preparation.
So a couple questions. What were your practice accuracies in your preparation? Like, when you were going through the course, what would you say your like easy, medium, hard accuracies were?
I would always get above the requirements. Like I'd say
Yeah.
it really depended on the topic. So some topics, if I really understood the topic, I mean, I would get 100% across the board. But other topics where it was hard, maybe I would kind of veer closer to the 90, 80, 70 that the course recommends.
Right. So that's pretty interesting. So even on that level, and I think this is another thing everyone should know about high accuracy. Look, you were getting close to 100% accuracy in a lot of your practice, but maybe your overall was something around 90% or something. And I think it's key for people to realize the way you settled into the test, even though you were nervous and the way things worked out, I think part of it was the depth of your practice accuracy, that you really understood what you were doing when you were doing those individual practice questions. Then you got to the practice test, tightened it up, got super comfortable with it, and it all came together on test day. So definitely, like, you saw how he settled in. Things didn't go awry. Things didn't break down. His scores were stuck at 760 test after test after test. And the reason for that was your foundation was strong in a few ways. Now, did you warm up before the test at all by doing practice questions?
I did not know. So that the morning, it was an 8 a.m. exam. And so I woke up at like 5:30. There's a gym in my building. So I worked out, had a cup of coffee, had breakfast, and then went and took the exam. And my thinking there is if I get up early and I kind of have a morning, then by the time I take the exam, I'm not going to be tired. I'll be kind of awake, and by working out, I'll kind of get any anxiety out. And
yeah, perfect. Yeah, I had sort of a similar approach. But I scheduled my exam for 11, so I had the same effect as you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did. I gave myself a few hours to get into that thing before I took it, because man, you don't want to be just waking up if you can help it. But you didn't do any practice questions to warm up. So I wonder if you had done a few, maybe that would have locked you in a little sooner. You would have you would have gotten rid of some of those jitters. So one thing that people can do is, if before you take your test, do a few practice questions, even 4 or 5, or even 3, like a couple easies and 2 mediums or something. Kind of wraps your mind around the test, and it can reduce some anxiety. I learned that from a debrief that I had read. Someone said he was nervous, so he sat there doing practice questions. I'm like, well, wait a minute. So I could cure my pre-test nervousness by doing practice questions. I'm definitely going to do that. So I don't know. It's just a thought that might have helped with some of that nervousness in the beginning, because you can see that it takes a little while to get settled in, even though you did get up early, work out the whole bit. So then you keep going. So now, how did you feel you had done on the quant section?
I actually felt, and I think this is just my personality, I felt I didn't do that well.
Right.
Obviously I ended up doing well. But when I left the quant, I felt like there was a couple problems that took me a little bit longer. I was tight on time, where I finished with maybe 1 or 2 minutes left. But I think just because I was as prepared as I was, my preparedness kicked in, and kind of just carried me through to be able to answer these problems correctly, regardless of maybe nerves or times where I felt like I was a little crunched on time.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting. So, but you didn't feel that great about it. You didn't feel like you had nailed the thing, and then you come to the verbal section next. Did you feel like putting all your energy into that at that point, or how did you feel about the test?
At that point, I just felt like I'm going to do the best. I'm going to do the best I can, and I'm going to just focus on moving quickly and saving time where I can. And I did do that more in the verbal section, and I think it helped me a lot, because when I got to maybe those last 10 problems, I had a little bit of extra time. I felt like I could take the time to ensure every problem was correct.
Yeah.
And I left the verbal feeling a lot more confident in my score.
That's interesting. And the other thing, people, you want to realize, look, I've seen someone just yesterday mentioning the mistake people make, And that is, you feel like you're not really sure how you did on one section. You give up for the rest of the test. And then you get your score and you killed the first section. And you messed up you didn't do as well as you could have on the other sections. You have to go back and retake the test. So no matter how painful it is, even if you're unsure how you did on that first section, go through the rest of the test and nail it. Say, I'm going to do my best. Do your best on every question. I remember doing the practice test too. I would be halfway through a practice test and I'm looking and the clock is ticking and I've only got a third of the time left for the section. And I'm like, man, I'm going to get wrecked on this thing. And I learned to say, no, man, just do the best you can. You never know how this is going to turn out, So yeah, focusing on those verbal questions, saying, look, I'm going to push through this. I'm going to get through this section on time and make it happen. And then you went through the other sections and you even got a 6 in the essay. So you really followed through and nailed this thing, So how'd you feel when the score showed up?
Excited. I was very, very excited and also just relieved to kind of be done with this whole process. I did better on the exam than I did on any of the practice tests. So the score came up and I kind of, I wanted to celebrate, but then obviously I was in the testing room. So I kind of got up, got all my things, went in the hallway and patted myself on the back a little bit and celebrated just to be.
Yeah, it's pretty sick. It's pretty fun. And it all paid off, all the prep. And a lot of people say, oh man, the real test is harder, but obviously you didn't find it harder. A lot of the time you can step it up on test day. You don't have to be saying, oh, I'm nervous, I'm anxious, I'm not as going to do as well on test day. Expect yourself to maybe do better on the real test because you're going to step it up. You might get that extra 10 points as Jacob did, really go into the test with the idea that you can be successful. And so we got one more question coming in. Someone's saying, well, how did you stick with all this prep and not get distracted? And I guess you kind of addressed that, but is there anything else you could, 5 months is a long time for anybody.
Yeah, I think just being really honest with yourself, making it so that the amount of time that you're studying is visible to yourself, maybe setting a date for when you want to take the GMAT by.
Which doesn't mean you have to set your test date that day, by the way.
Yes.
It could just be a date that you have in mind.
And to your point, Marty, I actually wanted to take the test a month earlier than I did. The original date I set for myself when I started was, all right, I'm going to take a test on April 15th, but I didn't schedule it. When April 15th came along, I didn't feel like I was ready yet and actually pushed it back an entire month. But by setting that April 15th date, and by tracking the amount of time I was spending studying and tracking my progress through the course, when I had a week or two where I couldn't study, because I made it really visible to myself and I kept reminding myself of the goal, it allowed me to very easily write my track.
Yeah, interesting. And I guess also you knew what your why was very clearly, right? I mean, as you said, you've been thinking about going to business school since you were in high school. I guess that's what it was.
Yes, I thought I'd want to get my MBA, and I initially wanted to work in Wall Street since I was in high school. That my goals have kind of changed a little bit with my MBA, but it's still kind of the financial realm, and it's something I've always wanted to do. So I knew I wanted this, right? So it wasn't hard for me to motivate myself.
Yeah, so I would definitely see that. That's a clear clue right there, why everything worked out. So yeah, peeps, keep in mind what your goal is. That'll keep you going. It'll keep things happening. And some other tips I have for you is one is you can make it fun. Play the GMAT like a game. Don't necessarily see the studying as completing a syllabus, but kind of like what Jacob did. Look, here's what I need to learn to get my score to my goal. And one thing I did when I was prepping is I treated every topic I learned as a win. Like what I really wanted to do is drive my score higher. Okay. So how do you do that? Well, you learn a topic. So now I learn probability, and now I know my score is going to be higher. And then I learn combinations and permutations, and I know my score is going to be higher. Then I learn modifiers, and I know my score is going to be higher. You don't even have to take a practice test to know that if you go from not knowing what something is to knowing how to do it like so naturally, well, your score just went up and it's a win. And you can play the GMAT like a game and just keep driving your score up and saying, I just, chalked up another win. You can have a win every single day of your prep because you learned something new, Someone's asking, how long did the whole prep take? And I think you said 4 or 5 months. It was about 5 months.
Yes, 5 months. And that was only studying 5 to 10 hours a week. So I think if someone, it depends on your situation, right? So if you're in a situation where you're taking a month off work to study, then you might be able to study it all. You might be able to do all that studying in a month or 2 months, but it really depends on what situation you're in personally.
Yeah, exactly. And and they're also asking whether it makes a difference to start with verbal or quant, and it kind of doesn't. It doesn't make that much difference. I found that as I get better at verbal, I get better at quant. As I get better at quant, I get better at verbal because so much of what you do for each one pays off for the other one. I mean, I kind of come in from the opposite direction, by the way, of Jacob. Like, my strong side was verbal, and I now and then I'll be working with someone on quant, and I'm working on verbal every day for Target Test Prep, making new questions for the course, new content, and my quant is getting better from doing critical reasoning. My quant is getting better from doing reading comprehension. My quant is getting better from doing verbal. So no, it doesn't matter too much which one you do first, and it's best to do them sort of in parallel, to be honest, because that way you're not going to, like, if you go through all of quant and then you hit verbal, man, it's going to be 2 months back the last time you saw a quant question. And now you have to constantly review to stay up to quant. And also verbal can take a while to learn. I mean, that was your biggest task, Jacob's biggest task. So imagine if he, did all the quant first and then he had to hit verbal. Man, it takes a while. It has to click. A lot of time these things have to click, or you might discover, man, I need a lot more work on this than I expected. Like someone who's an engineer, you're like, I'm quant's easy. I'm going to do verbal first. Man, and then you find that, the quant on the GMAT is not the same quant you're using in engineering, and then you realize you need a lot more time on this than you expected, but you put it off. So it's best to do them in parallel. And by the way, folks, please like and share this video if you like what we're talking about, because I think it'll help a lot of people and be cool to show it around. Any other final thoughts about the Target Test Prep course, about anything else you did, that people might want to know about? I think we got a sense of what your success formula was so far, but maybe there's something else you want to add.
The only other thing I could think of is kind of along the lines of knowing yourself. For some people, the courses offered by Target Test Prep might be better. For some people, the self-study might be better. And I think just being honest with yourself and the way that you learn will really help you improve. So if you feel like you're someone that needs to be taught, needs to have some sort of structured course, then I think go that route. If you're someone that feels that you study better on your own, which is how I felt personally, then I think that's the best option for you. But every person's different. Don't do what I did because we're not the same people. I mean, take who you are, or the way you learn, and what you know, and kind of tailor your own path. And I think it'll make it a lot easier for you and a lot quicker.
That sounds really good. That's where it's at. Do what's going to work for you. Make it happen. Be honest. Jump into your weak areas. Cover your bases. Be super thorough, and you're going to get to your score goal. Because eventually, the thing is, everything we're hearing here is that some form of effective preparation is going to work. The question was actually about the test itself. Should you start with quant or verbal? Well, before we go, we will talk. We can cover that for a second. It really depends on what you're strong in. For me personally, I'm a little stronger in verbal than quant, or a lot stronger in verbal than quant. So I do quant first because I want to be fresh. And then verbal, I kind of walk. It's like a walk home. Like now I can walk home. Like I did the race, now I can walk home. But if I were about the same in both, or maybe not quite as strong in verbal, I might do verbal first because, well, it doesn't take up as much energy, and now I can kill myself in the quant to get through the rest of the test. So it really depends, what is the best for you. If you want to warm up with your easier section, do that. If you want to get the harder section out of the way, do that. And it sort of depends on which one is much harder for you. Any other questions before we go? because we're kind of time is close to being up here. I think we covered it. I think we know it made everything work for Jacob. If you want to hit me, contact us about the Target Test Prep course. Of course, you can sign up for the 5-day trial for $1 and see what the course is like, see the entire course, see what worked for Jacob, see what this SC section or the critical reasoning, all the quant topics obviously are covered in depth. So you can do that as well. I guess we're basically done. So I really appreciate you coming out, Jacob. It's been really fun. We all learned a lot. And everybody have a great rest of your day. Until next time.
It was good speaking with you, Marty.
Ciao.
Yeah.